morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Yesterday on Movie Math, I was very excited to shine a spotlight on some new emerging talent in Hollywood, behind the camera no less. As regular viewers of this channel know, I think it's very important to be familiar with the players not only in front of the camera but behind it, because they're all responsible for making the movies we love, or don't love. Plus, they're all very vibrant careers, very rewarding careers, and important careers. And it's an aspect of Hollywood that I don't like, that the attention tends to go just to people in front of the camera, so I do the best to correct it on my end. Well, anyway, the talent in question is producer Dan Lin, who first made a name for himself at Warner Brothers, producing their Sherlock Holmes franchise, the one with Guy Ritchie directing and Robert Downey Jr. starring. But now he's really becoming a major player over there because of the success of the Lego Movie, which we also talked about yesterday. And so I mentioned that he was not only going to be a producer on the Lego Movie 2, which they're fast-tracking for obvious reasons, but Warner Brothers is so confident in his abilities as a producer, they've also put him on board as a producer for their live-action Justice League movie. And Rodney Reese, a BTT viewer, picked up on that right away and said, wait. Did you just say live-action Justice League? Is that an official title or just a reference to Batman vs. Superman? Well, excellent question, Rodney, because there is a lot of title confusion over at Warner Brothers. Man of Steel 2 became Batman vs. Superman, and then a number of us have been referring to it as Justice League. Kind of a little good-natured ribbing at Warner Brothers because they're adding so many characters from the Justice League to the film that it might as well be called Justice League. But apparently Warner Brothers is like, this isn't our Justice League movie, this is our prequel, this is like our bridge movie, as opposed to Marvel taking years to kind of build up to the Avengers with multiple single one-shot films. Basically, they're just going to dovetail over at Warner Brothers into this big movie with just kind of this in-between chapter where they're going to it's almost like a prequel to the Justice League film. So the Justice League movie is definitely being made, and one of the rumors actually is that that's why you have a delay for Batman vs. Superman or Man of Steel 2 to 2016, because they want to get the scripts closer together, and so they can shoot them closer together and kind of have a 1-2 punch. Now I can see their reasoning there, but I actually feel by taking themselves off the board for such a long time, because we're not getting a DC movie till 2016, nothing in the interim, I think is actually, a dangerous move and potentially has long-term negative effects. Because you'll notice that people just aren't talking about it as much. The Jesse Eisenberg story failed to make, it made an initial splash, but it didn't make the ripples didn't have they didn't go as big or were as sustained as when you had the Ben Affleck news and you had also the Gal Gadot news as Wonder Woman. Now, and I don't think it's just because it's Jesse Eisenberg. I think that's very inventive, interesting casting, and just as Lightning Rod has the same Lightning Rod aspects as the Affleck and Gadot casting. But I just think that it's two things. I think not only is the film so far away at this point that people are like, I'll get to it later, but also I think that it's so far afield from the source material that I think Warner Brothers has lost that interactive quality that has developed with fans liking to think about upcoming films. It's a big thing. The way movies are covered has changed. They're covered extensively in pre-production. Even when the idea when someone thinks of it, we know about it in Hollywood, and that didn't always used to be the case. But I think it's a lot of fun for us to kind of try and put the pieces together. We almost feel like we're a part of the conversation. And I think to some degree we are. I think Hollywood is very aware of these discussions that go on online because they're almost a way to track how well their film will come together. Now, of course, I don't think Hollywood should be led around by us, but I think that they should, you always want to keep a finger on the pulse of your fan base. So anyway, I think that the films are so far afield of what our frame of reference is from the comics and the animation, that I think that that's another aspect of why we're not engaged as much anymore, because we're like, I don't know what you're doing. I guess I'm just gonna have to wait and see. This will pay off if what they're doing is spectacular, but I think they're going to disappear from the fans, maybe not the hardcore fans, but the mainstream consciousness for like a year and a half, which is not great. Think about it. You might be like, well, hey, Jesse Eisenberg is playing Lex Luthor. You can see him do it in 2 years. That's hard to get excited about as opposed to a year. All right, which was initially the situation. All right, so anyway, that's squared away. We're getting a Justice League movie, probably in 2017, I would guess, or so, after this 2016 movie. So let's turn our attention to that 2016 film. One of you sent me an article yesterday, which was an interview with Zack Snyder with a French outlet called Popcorn Magazine. And two things were kind of clarified. One, he referred to the film himself as Batman versus Superman. So again, it kind of lends itself more to that bridge film. It's not Man of Steel 2, and the fact that its own director doesn't even view it that way is very telling. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the interviewer said, hey, are you going to reference the Dark Knight Returns for Batman vs. Superman? Now, for those of you who aren't comic book readers, the Dark Knight Returns is the very iconic Frank Miller graphic novel, which told a story of Batman and Superman very late in their careers. Mostly Batman, but Superman very much came into the picture in a very iconic way. I'll get to that in a moment. And I think that The Dark Knight Rises was something of an homage to that. Certainly the reference to The Dark Knight, even the second film that Christopher Nolan did, was because that Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns is just so influential on not just the Batman comics, but comics in general. It came out at the same time as Watchmen, and that was really, talk about a 1-2 punch that changed the direction of comics, especially DC, to be darker and grittier and, more adult. So I think that the Dark Knight Returns influences all comic book movies. But of course, Zack Snyder has a good relationship with Frank Miller. Frank Miller left mainstream comics to create his own. He did 300 and Sin City. Both have been turned into very well, at least cult hit films, very well received. And like Frank Miller, Zack Snyder is a very strong visual creator. I think more so than story, actually. And I think that perhaps maybe Snyder hopefully realizes he might have made a mistake trying to copy Nolan's style, and maybe should go back to his own strong point, which are those strong visuals. That was one of the best things about 300, obviously, and especially one of the best things about Watchmen. I had major problems with the changes that Snyder made to the story, even switching dialogue to that. I mean, he tinkered with it to that degree. But I do feel that the opening credit sequence is one of the greatest things I've ever seen, particularly in a comic book film. So I would like to see him bring some of his more visual panache to Batman versus Superman. And I think if he's going to bring in this source material for Frank Miller and get away from the Nolan aspect, I think maybe that will be a good step for him. But anyway, the other thing that I thought was very interesting about this article, and he said, oh, of course I'm going to reference that because it's an iconic fight. And by the way, the Batman versus Superman fight in The Dark Knight Returns is iconic because Frank Miller created a scenario where they could both play for keeps. Now when Batman and Superman fight, neither one can really hurt the other seriously because they have comics to sell. But in this fight, it was a story that took place in the future, and they really were fighting to take the other one down. And that's what made it so brutal and so fascinating, and Miller really thought it out quite interestingly, and really almost made it a fight not only physically, but of their ideologies, which I hope that this movie is that sophisticated. That would be wonderful. So anyway, when he referenced it, he said, of course, we're going to talk about that. But he said, we're going to reference all comic books, the history of all comics for our Batman versus Superman. But this is really a script that Goyer and myself have worked on. Now, fascinating. Where's Chris Terrio in that discussion? Many of you are clinging to this Chris Terrio stuff, his involvement as like some kind of hope left for this film, which I think, I feel bad for you. It's very interesting. But Snyder's not even bringing it up. He's not saying, oh, Goyer and I came up with some great ideas. We're very excited the way Chris Terrio is executing them. And I think you're seeing already some political aspects behind the scenes here for fighting for ownership of the DC Cinematic Universe. And I think that's something that Joss Whedon has over at Marvel, and that's something Nolan enjoyed over at DC with his trilogy. An amazing degree of ownership. I think ownership to such a degree that it was a mistake for Warner Brothers, because he's still, even though he's left the films, rumored to be because he didn't agree with the casting of Ben Affleck, so he's not even an executive producer there anymore, but his shadow still exists across, the whole DC Cinematic Universe still. So we'll see. I think maybe that should be one of their top goals here, is to try and do something so different that they escape that, which I think would benefit them in the long run. But anyway, now who's the new owner? I think that Snyder and Goyer, when Man of Steel first came out, they were set up to be those new owners, the new architects of the DC Cinematic Universe. However, because the film divided audiences, I think more than Warner Brothers would have liked, and didn't have quite the box office haul that they also would have liked. Granted, it did do well, but I think it didn't come as close to Batman, the Nolan films, as they would have liked. Remember, those were billion-dollar films, and Man of Steel only ended up somewhere in the 600 million range, not very close to $1 billion at all. So, they don't want to take a step back. They want to continue to build, which is, I think, why you're going to have Batman in the title. Just as a symbol, a signal to moviegoers, hey, please come back. Batman is in this movie, and he's in it so much, he's in the title. But Snyder did say, well, of course, we all know it's an older Batman, but, so there are those aspects from The Dark Knight Returns as well. But anyway, I just feel that, this ownership situation will be interesting to see who comes out on top. But if they're all fighting already for, that doesn't sound to me like you have a bunch of creative minds working together for the best film possible. They're already becoming territorial. So I just think very telling that he didn't mention Terrio in that interview. All right, so that's the first story of the day. That continues to be a garbled mess over there. I really hope this works out. All right, for the sake of those involved, as I've said when I commented on their casting, I like Ben Affleck as Batman after seeing Runner Runner. I think he can do it. I like Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. I have my doubts about Gal Gadot, although I did like her very much in the Fast and Furious films she was in. So I think they have the right material here. And I liked Henry Cavill a lot in Man of Steel. I think that they have the right players. But I just, as I've said many times, I really question the people who are doing the actual building. I think that the behind the camera, in the front of the camera talent is good, behind the camera talent, not good. Maybe Dan Lin will come in there and fix things up, because I really like the work he's done so far. All right, so the second story of the day. Video game movies are continuing to become major players in Hollywood, and we perhaps really are going to see them come in next after comic book films. They're going to probably try and share the space. It'll be interesting to see if video games can enjoy the same success. So the big headline yesterday was that Sony is going to make a Rabbids movie based on the Ubisoft game. They're kind of like the Minions from Despicable Me meets Stitch, although they to some degree are genuinely evil. I've played their games, and they're very naughty. Stitch is always like, oh, that's cute. He's like, compared to the Rabbids, Stitch is like the Beav on Leave It to Beaver. That's kind of like the discrepancy there. So they already have a TV series, and they're very popular. And also, this was something I thought very interesting. The Rabbids have a theme park ride. Ubisoft has been experimenting with expanding the brand to different areas, and so they had it on TV, and then they took it to a theme park ride. But they did it in France, and I didn't even know about this theme park. So any BTT viewers from France, tell me if you've been, or anyone in Europe. It's called Futuroscope, and it's the second biggest theme park in France after Paris Disneyland. But what's interesting about it is that it's based on multimedia experiences. It's a lot of 4D and 3D movies, IMAX screens, visual sensory experiences instead of going into like a ride that's on rails and stuff. Like that's not a roller coaster type theme park. Or dark rides, as Disney World has made very popular. So I looked some pictures at it, and I urge you to look it up because it's kind of like this really cool, sophisticated Epcot, like if Epcot were made by Europe. And I love Epcot. I'm a big Epcot fan. So, I don't know when I'm going to France again, but going to Futuroscope would definitely be on my radar because it looks awesome. Very, very cool architecture. I'm surprised that no movies have shot there because it's really, very distinctive. But anyway, they have a ride called the Rabbids Time Machine, and it was very well reviewed. A lot of people also have turned up to watch it and be on the ride, or however Futuroscope refers to them. So Sony and Ubisoft said, we see, there's still obviously potential to grow this brand even further. Let's make a movie. And Ubisoft has several movies in development in Hollywood that are not just in development, like sometimes you can have a movie in development for decades, but these seem to be genuinely moving forward. For instance, they have, with New Regency, that's the production company that made 12 Years a Slave. Brad Pitt, I believe, is working with them extensively now because that was such a good relationship. But anyway, they're making Splinter Cell with Tom Hardy. They also now, Fox is working on Assassin's Creed to star Michael Fassbender. And then also at Sony, in addition to Rabbids, they're doing a Watch Dogs film based on one of their newest games. And I looked it up. Apparently, it's a vigilante with hacker skills. And I wrote skills with a Z because that's kind of the vibe they're going for. So I think Batman, if he was like Batman crossed with Mark Zuckerberg, kind of that. Taking the hacker is always kind of like a sidekick role in movies, where they're like, the hero needs to like get into somewhere and he's like, I have a hacker friend, and it's usually like in a basement, the role. But apparently they're going to try and make that person the hero. So I think that's interesting. I always like non-traditional heroes, so that should be fun. But so I'd be curious to see how the Rabbids do. I think the Rabbids, I do have some concern as someone who isn't a video game player that they are so naughty. I don't see how they could possibly be the lead. And I think some mainstream parents, for instance, might be like, this movie seems to be a bad influence on my children. But they're already letting them play the video games and watch the TV show and apparently go on the ride. So why not go and see the movie? But I'm curious to know how you guys feel about this. Would you want to see a Rabbids movie? As I said before, I'm not a gamer. But I think that Splinter Cell, Assassin's Creed, and Watch Dogs seem like better properties to me. And, as we talked about the Lego movie, that is such a crowded and competitive field, they would have to get the Rabbids movie just right. But also, they don't speak. So, it hasn't stopped the Minions, But still, I think that I have some question as to what the storyline would be. But anyway, video game movies continuing to have a lot of news and really take a place in Hollywood. All right, so that's the second story of the day. The third story of the day, I really wanted to bring a movie to your attention. We've talked about someone behind the camera at the beginning, Dan Lin. Now I want to talk about Miles Teller. Now, Miles Teller really impressed a lot of people last year with The Spectacular Now. He impressed me. I thought he was very good. He's also on the upcoming film Divergent in a supporting role, also with Shailene Woodley. And he was just in That Awkward Moment. And he's someone building a lot of buzz in Hollywood. Now, I saw him at Comic-Con at the Divergent panels. And I thought, actually the press conferences. I didn't go to the panels. He was at the press conference. And I had some problems with Miles Teller. I interviewed him. I thought he was very nice. I'll put a link to the interview at the end. But he was very aggressive. He really wasn't a team player. And as someone who comes from an improv background, I have a real problem with people who aren't good at sharing space. I mean, if you're going to be in a press conference with other actors, you don't answer everybody's questions for them. He just kept jumping in. So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I went from really being excited about him in The Spectacular Now to having some questions about him as to whether or not I felt he was the kind of guy that you want to see succeed. And also, interviews are an important part of, being a successful actor. And I don't know how well he's going to come across in interviews. So, but you can watch the one that I did and tell me what you think. But anyway, he's also rumored to become Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four film. So his star is definitely rising. How long it will stay at the top, we don't know. But he is definitely someone to watch. But he's really somebody to watch because he had a film at Sundance that was so well received, it's going to, I think, do more for his career than being Reed Richards in a Fantastic Four film. It's called Whiplash. It won the top audience and grand jury awards at Sundance. And it also stars a fanboy favorite, J.K. Simmons. He played J. Jonah Jameson, obviously, most famously in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. And it's about a young jazz drummer played by Miles Teller who goes to this conservatory, music conservatory school in New York City. And his instructor, he's a jazz drummer. His instructor is played by J.K. Simmons, who is just rides him so hard, playing till his fingers are bleeding, that it really kind of talks about, it shows the teacher-student relationship in music. It's almost like a jazz Karate Kid, but it also has elements of Fight Club in it because it's like very brutal and it really, kind of running the gauntlet to become a great musician and what that entails. And everyone's just going crazy about this movie, so I wanted to put it on your radar in case you hadn't heard of it because it's something the industry is really talking about. It'll come out sometime this year, and it's also a really, speaking of behind-the-camera talent, it's a really big career move for Damien Chazelle, who is the writer-director of the film. It's his second feature. He also wrote Grand Piano. That's that Elijah Wood, John Cusack movie that's coming out, also on demand. It's not making a huge splash, but he also wrote The Last Exorcism Part 2. So Damien Chazelle, another talent, kind of like Ryan Coogler last year with Fruitvale Station, another big talent coming out of the festival circuit, and I think he will also move ahead as is Miles Teller. And maybe this will do something for J.K. Simmons as well, who I think is on a new ABC Family show, but I think is a really great actor and doesn't quite, I think he's a great character actor and doesn't really always get the attention I think he deserves. But really exciting movie. Keep your eye on this. I think it's going to make a big splash with the media and maybe even award season. It might be peaking too early. Fruitvale Station, as we all know, never made it to award season. It did very well in the smaller independent awards like the Gotham Awards and the Spirit Awards and such. But it just did not register. It was just too competitive. But Whiplash, might be this year's Fruitvale Station. So, and also, interestingly, Michael B. Jordan and Miles Teller were both in That Awkward Moment. So, funny to see all these people crisscrossing and how small Hollywood really is. But keep an eye on that movie. It's a big deal. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. The viewer question comes from Alyssa Steiner. And Alyssa says, question for you, Grace. With the Oscars coming up, I've noticed many people mentioning campaigning for award season. What exactly do the actors do to campaign? Do they just simply get interviews and tell people to see their film, or is there more to it? And someone actually, another BTT viewer, very kindly tried to, gave their answer to your question, Alyssa, and they said, well, it's basically going out there and interviewing and such. But it's more than that. It's a little bit more. So I think that initial answer was generally correct, but I wanted to give you, Alyssa, and everybody some more of the details because it's a really fascinating process. And as I've mentioned on a couple of videos, Matthew McConaughey has mastered it this year. So anyway, the reason you aren't aware of what campaigning is because you don't vote for an Oscar. And I think when you asked this question, Alyssa, and I was thinking about it last night before answering it today, it dawned on me that perhaps because the campaigning is so intense within the industry, kind of behind the Hollywood curtain, maybe that's a reason that audiences, the mainstream public and moviegoers, don't find themselves as invested in the Oscars, because they aren't aware this campaigning is something they don't see. So they just show up, everybody just shows up on March 2nd to watch the Oscars and isn't aware of all the jockeying that's been going on in Hollywood. Hollywood kind of circles the wagons and just takes care of this themselves, but yet, for some reason, thinks everybody then should watch, even though they weren't involved in the whole process. So maybe going forward, if the Academy wants better ratings for the Oscars, and maybe to have people a little more emotionally invested, they should try and draw them more into what's going on. So anyway, you don't see this campaigning because it's not for you. You don't vote for who wins. So they're directing all their attention at the guilds, because of the guild awards, and also a lot of guild members. And when I say guilds, I'm talking the Screen Actors Guild, the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, the Producers Guild, and there are also guilds at other levels as well, and organizations. They're really focusing there because, of course, those people vote in their own category, and then they're Academy members. So that's really what the campaigning is. That's who's voting, and that's who they're trying to get the votes for. So what does that entail? All right, there are screenings, but there's special industry screenings that are just for these guilds. They get to go for free. All of these people, if you're in a guild, you get to go for free to see all these movies. You get screeners in the mail because they really court these people because they're the ones that vote, and it's a really great time of year for anyone. And it's a great time for those people to feel more a part of Hollywood, even if their careers haven't reached the levels that they would have liked. But these aren't just screenings. What happens is that after the screening, the talent will show up, and someone from the media usually will interview them, and they'll really hit home why the movie is so important. For instance, if you are on HBO, if you have subscribed to HBO and you ever watch the shows, not when they air, but on demand, there's like a little bit after each show that I really think this is really smart on HBO's part, and I'm sure it's campaigning on its own behalf for awards season, but they'll talk to the creators and the talent, and they'll find out, kind of like the impetus for the scenes and why each scene was important to what they were trying to do there. That's kind of what happens here, and it's also a chance for the talent to start laying the narrative for their film. For instance, let's take Matthew McConaughey. He can go up there and really talk about how this isn't just a movie about Ron Woodruff, but it's about the fight against AIDS, and how this was a straight guy who was, this is everybody's fight, and Jared Leto can talk about the importance of portraying a transgendered character, and they can both really also underline the incredible work they did to transform themselves into their roles. They really can drive that in and get the points that they want to make to these voters. So that's the package. It's not just a screening, it's a screening with a discussion. And of course, these actors stick around, they shake everyone's hand, just like a politician. It's very much, the word campaigning is used correctly. So that's one aspect of it. The other is that they run ads in the industry publications, the trades. For instance, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline. They run these really beautiful ads. And if you ever go to these sites at this time of year, you'll see, even because there's less printed material now. These used to be beautiful ads in print, but now they're banner ads, obviously, online. So if you go to these websites, you'll see them for your consideration. And of course, famously, a few years ago, Melissa Leo bought her own ads and took her own photos, and they were very, not particularly well done. And it's unheard of. Your studio was supposed to campaign for you. They have whole Oscar PR departments that handle this, but she took it upon herself. I believe it actually resulted in an Oscar for her. I think that was the year that she actually won. So I guess you should take out your own ad. So that's one aspect. That's another aspect. Getting these ads, and they try and also, what the ad does is try and drive home the importance of the film. They have these beautiful pictures, they have quotes from, reviewers, and also sometimes quotes from talent that talk about, something important, and also quotes from the film, really trying to say, this is a film for the ages, it should be awarded as a film for the ages. So that's another aspect. Now the third aspect is that they do these editorials in the trades. They and also in magazines that people will see. Vanity Fair, they'll do covers like that. Time Magazine, publications that industry, these voters are reading. New York Magazine, they go in there and they do these really long interviews. And also, these publications will do like Oscar or Best Actor contender discussions. For instance, Variety picked the top contenders for Best Actor. So as an Oscar, someone campaigning for an Oscar, you want to be included in that group. And they interview them, and they take a nice group shot that they can put on the cover, and they're like, the contenders for Best Actor or Best Director. And both McConaughey and Jared Leto were in there. Jake Gyllenhaal was also in Variety's interview group, though, and that didn't materialize in Oscars nominations or even Golden Globe nominations for him for Prisoners. So that's very interesting. It doesn't always work. But you want to get in that group. You want to be in that picture. You just want to start having Academy voters start to look at you and think of you as a serious Oscar contender. It's the same way, for instance, when we vote for president here in the United States, you can't just vote for anyone. You have to vote for the political parties have picked. And it's the same way for an Oscar. You can't just vote for any performance that year. You have to vote for the performances that the studios have picked to promote. So this is a way for them to let you know who they've picked. So that's kind of, I hope that's, Alyssa, I hope that's helpful to you in understanding the campaign process. And as I said, Matthew McConaughey has really done a stellar job this year. And while other performances in his category might be as good or better, no one, I think, has done a better job campaigning for an Oscar than McConaughey. Also, for instance, he has True Detective out right now. That's another way you can campaign, very subversively. It's coming out, it's airing right as everyone's voting for the Oscar. And he really is phenomenal on that show. I'm so impressed with his work there. So I think because you're not only, when they vote for Oscar, I know this is a point of contention for a number of people. It's not just for that role often, but it's for a whole actor's work. For also, it represents, I think for McConaughey, he's winning because he's changed who he is as an actor. He's changed his persona. He's gone from a mainstream romantic comedy lead to becoming this artiste. And I think that plays particularly well with Academy voters who, as I said, their careers haven't particularly worked out. So the art is particularly important to them because that's why they're still in the business, even though they have not been able to succeed business-wise. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question. Thanks for watching. Bye.